a bit on an old dog learning new tricks in some ways, because I started coding in '83. I basically left the computer industry to start a coffee business. Whether or not that was a wise decision, only time will tell. But I've always tried to keep my hand in development. In the '90s, I always thought I'd always be a developer. But today we're going to be talking about specifically how I'm using Blazor and .NET to move from a legacy system. Anyway, so they say you're supposed to start a presentation with a joke. So hopefully the joke will come up. It's a bit slow. So instead of doing one joke, I'll do two. So 3 programmers walk into a bar and order 3 beers, holding up 2 fingers. It's a very binary joke, that. And the other joke is, why can't the Java programmer see? Because he can't see sharp. Anyway, so that's the 2 jokes done.
But they do like coffee because it's Java, right? Anyway.
Yeah, I've never understood why Java and coffee got mixed up. Anyway, so what am I going to cover today? Well, I'm going to just discuss what my project is and why I chose Blazor. Then I'm just going to do a quick thing of VS Code with VS Studio. I don't know if I'm going to go that too deep here, because I think we had a discussion about IDEs. I'm going to then discuss about code reusability and specifically around .NET, and then just touch in EF Core, which I saw one of the other guys is using, and then discuss .NET 5 and 6, and specifically the use of interfaces and transportability and how I've enjoyed that. So to give you a bit of perspective, well, I'll cover why this is new to me. And then I'll go through the basics of a Blazor page and why it's what's interesting about what's going on in Blazor. And then I'll do an introduction of Blazor Components, which is, I think, the real power of behind Blazor. And then I'm just going to go through the open source and packages that I use and why I chose them, and also give you some ideas of what to look for. If my screen changes. If I get the next slide, that is. It's suddenly going to jump ahead 75 slides because I'm now pressed page down 75 times. Okay. Sure. Okay, so the project is to replace a legacy system that is a coffee management system. The coffee management system that we wrote, so as I said, it's going to jump 25 screens ahead. So let's try to go back.
You have to talk fast now.
I'm talking too slowly.
No, just to keep up with the slides. It's just a joke. Cool.
Just let me go back. I don't know why this is so slow. Zoom obviously takes taking a bit of energy. Look, while I'm waiting for the slides to come up, I'll explain. So at the moment, we run a thing called a coffee management program, which we wrote really as an idea that how I want to run coffee in the beginning. And the idea was, people who drink coffee normally don't drink 1 cup of coffee. And one of the irritations I had around coffee and why I sort of got into this was the fact that people, you run out of coffee at the wrong time. So I wrote a system. We wrote an access product which we were hoping to get other people to then write it into more of a .NET framework. This was in 2005. And we were trying to get them to, we wrote an example in Access. We said, look, we want something like this, but we want to be on a website, and we wanted to go about mobile. And after spending a lot of money with them doing development, they couldn't understand what we were trying to do. And we ended up writing it ourselves. And that system does prediction management. It does subscription management. It does our order management. And it also manages our repairs. So basically, we work with the workshop, and the workshop the workshop is all manual. They don't run on computers. So we basically wrote the system to manage their paperwork because we couldn't manage it anymore. That system then grew into an ASP.NET Web Forms application, which basically, I should have moved that to SQL before I did that, but I didn't. And what I really want to do with the new project is move away from the old ASP.NET to running on an Access database, and then move to something that's latest generation stuff, and also work with Woo and be cloud-based. So I'll in the time that we've since 2006, we've gone through 3 different versions of our website, and we now run on WordPress, and we run Woo as the e-commerce site. The original website was originally written by me in ASP.NET, and obviously the way websites work, you can't really have these legacy websites hanging around. So we moved to WordPress about 5 years ago, and it's been an interesting experience, to say the least. I mean, I'm not a fan of PHP, but I know, Sarah, you're probably working in it, so I won't say any horrible things about it.
You're welcome to.
So if this does eventually change slides, then I'll go to the thing. When I looked at what is available, I looked at a lot of products. I considered doing PHP. I don't really know PHP, but I considered moving to PHP because I thought it would be easier, but the system's quite complex, and I thought to write all the stuff in the back end of a WordPress, and the way WordPress plugs in is a bit messy. It's got all these things where it injects stuffs in, and I just thought this is going to be an absolute nightmare if I write this whole product in WordPress. So I looked around at what other products were available on the web, and I saw that there were other products. This is now jumping ahead again. So I looked at there were other products that were using the REST protocol to pull data into their products, and I thought that was probably a pretty good solution for what I was trying to do. So unfortunately, we've jumped ahead that other slide, so I've got to wait for this thing to catch up. It's extremely slow. I don't know why. Anyway, so I dabbled with Flutter. I considered using Java and some of the frameworks, but I suppose I'm comfortable with C#, and I actually was quite excited with what was going on with Blazor, which is originally the guy who's behind it. I can't remember his name, but he's basically, his vision is for Blazor to become ubiquitous throughout the whole of the .NET stack. So I think that's quite exciting, and that's why I ended up deciding to stick with it. There's a lot of promise around Blazor. It seems like they're going to have a lot of speed increases. I'll cover this week. Actually, there was an announcement about .NET 6, and they covered some stuff about Blazor and how about .NET 6 and how much faster it is than a lot of the other platforms. I'll try to wait for my slides to catch up. Now I'm talking too fast and they are too slow. So let's see what happens. I'm just wondering if my screen resolution is too high. Anyway,
Let me just say, I mean, especially since we are having the lag issue, if anyone has any questions, Warren, do you mind if they just ask you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'll share the slides if you want afterwards. I'm not really going to talk about this. I was going to talk about why I chose Visual Studio over VS Code. I am trying to make I've got a Mac and a PC, so I'm trying to write the code so it can be on both. And I've sort of got Visual Studio working well on the Mac. So I sort of was going to do Visual Studio Code, because of my old project, I had a problem with the solution files always having issues. And I think it's because they moved away from these solution files that are not XML based. So that solved the problem. But one of the issues I have with the current product is we had a huge crash, and the backup I thought I had, I obviously didn't have. So my code is out of sync with what we had, which we actually run the system. Current order management system one, so that's a problem. So I'm going to not really go into this because I don't think it's that important, to be totally honest. But yeah, if you guys want any questions while we're waiting for the slide to change.
If I can ask a question, just you mentioned you dabbled with Flutter. I was about to look into Flutter. I'm just curious what your opinions were.
So Flutter's basically like a real monster object-oriented product, and it starts becoming really complex really quickly. And it was fine. This was fine to start off with, but I was nervous. So basically, Flutter. The reason why I looked at Flutter was because of mobile, and what Flutter does is it emulates the mobile screen. So it's actually got its own sort of like mobile emulator, so that you can have one mobile UI for all mobile devices, well, specifically Android and iOS. And that was initially interesting, but then I found that basically it's like this presentation layer, and I started getting nervous about it not being native. So I sort of made my decision not to do it in the end, because I thought there was a lot of discussion about Xamarin being faster, and I think it's got promise. It's just, for what I wanted to do, I don't think it was applicable. Okay. So my slide is finally caught up. So let's talk about, so one of the things that's interesting to me about the new .NET is this EF core. So what EF core allows you to do is write a class, and then from the class you can create the database, and the database generates automatically. So you'll see on the screen, I've got a class which links to a whole lot of linked lists, and it then generates the database automatically for you. This is very powerful, and in fact, now that I'm getting to use it more and more, it does really help. I will say you need to have some understanding of how to database design, which I have. I have got experience in databases, but you don't have to have a hell of a lot. It does a lot of the design for you. You have to do a lot of the unique indexing and all that stuff behind in the model. But if you understand that stuff, it's pretty easy to follow. And there's a lot of stuff on Stack, Stack, whatever. And there's a lot of things telling you what to do if you're not sure. But it is quite exciting that you just write the class, and then it generates the database. And then you modify the class, and it generates the database. You can also do something where you start off with the database, and it takes the database and it generates the code for you, the classes. And then you can also just do a manual map. So you can do your own class, and as long as it matches, it'll work. It's sort of, I put a question there because there are some times where it doesn't match the database. The class doesn't match the database design, and then you get a mismatch, and then it starts giving you some runtime errors. But the code first, which is what I'm using, is actually really powerful. And the only thing I will say is that you do a lot of data code modifications, and you end up with a lot of database updates. And you get this pile of database, and I tend to clean them out every now and then. and then start a brand new migration so that at least I start new. But it is quite powerful, and it does design a relatively good database. Okay, I'm going to go to the next screen. Hopefully it'll come up. And where I discuss about the reusability of .NET itself. So .NET 5 is open source. It's and so is .NET 6. Obviously, Microsoft written a lot of code around there, but there has been external additions to the library. But what's important and what's nice is that if you are stuck on something and you don't really know what to do, you can actually look at their class and see what they're doing, and you get an idea of how they implemented it. This is also useful for the expanded classes. So as I said, it'll come up eventually. It does work on Apple, Windows, and Linux, and it does with WebAssembly and Xamarin. It allows you to run on mobile pretty easily. And with the new version of .NET, which is called MAUI, which is multiple application user interface, hopefully we're getting closer and closer to a point where we only have to code once and just basically exist on all platforms. That's a real dream. I think it's been a dream since the 80s. I saw there were a couple of the guys from the 80s who've spoken about transportability since the 80s. C was supposed to be the answer, but we haven't really had a full answer to that. Okay, the next slide is actually a summary of the new things that were covered in the .NET presentation this week, where they discuss some of the things about .NET and what's coming. Basically, they've done a whole lot of tests on speeds. The Blazor is very important to them, to Microsoft. There's a lot of Blazor integration. And they also want to then have, so MAUI is also going to have Internet of Things. It's going to have, it can run on gaming. It's going to have AI stuff. And that's really what the vision is. I've put a link in the show to the video, but you can just Google it on YouTube. It's a pretty good presentation. The guy's a far better presenter than I am. But he goes through a lot of what's going on, and he gives some examples of what's going on with the design of the language. And one of the interesting examples, he talks about the difference between MVC and the new versions of .NET, and basically how much less code you have to write in order to achieve the same thing. So the next thing I want to discuss was interfaces. These were pretty new to me when obviously with .NET 2, these things didn't exist. So interfaces or injection, which are used for injection as well, but interfaces are really powerful in creating basically a front face and many backends that you can manipulate. So a lot of the examples that I looked at when I was trying to teach myself Blazor spoke about the interfaces. And what's exciting is that you can have a single interface that talks to many databases, can be in-memory databases, can be SQL-based databases, can be MS SQL, can be MySQL, can be REST. And they are, it means that you can write one piece of code that uses the interface, and then your user interface doesn't have to change. So you basically can, you don't have to rewrite for every single platform that you're writing on. I'll cover what I found it useful for as well later, but you can very easily create generics as well, which allows you to to quickly access basic tables. So if you've got a whole lot of tables that you're accessing, but you don't want to write all the code to do the CRUD, you can use a generic repository, and that allows you to then, whether it's MS SQL or MySQL or AWS or whatever, it doesn't matter, because your user interface interfaces it through the interface rather than through the backend code. I don't know if I'm making that clear, but I sort of got this diagram with the little square and the pentagon and the triangle, and that's the idea, is that these things all, even though there are many objects, they can plug in to one basic interface. So it's a bit like a two-prong adapter fitting into a three-prong plug, and the good thing is you only need to have the one interface, and you can use it on multiple implementations. So hopefully my screen will change a bit quicker this time. I'm worried about the videos now because they're going to be slow. So the next slide, I've got an example of interface where you'll see I've just defined a single, so I took the code and just pasted it, so rather than having a code example. So you'll see, it's a bit hard to explain without you seeing it. So basically you'll see a single line where I'm saying, here is a repository to access the department, and it returns departments, or returns a department. And on the one side, I'm using SQL to return it, and on the other side, I'm using REST. So whether I'm writing it on a server side or client side, I can use the same interface. And that means that I don't have to rewrite my code if I'm going to be my UI code, because it doesn't matter whether I'm going to be client server or server specific, and that's very, very useful. And whether or not and also I can change my database platform pretty quickly as well. There is discussion in the .NET forums that the DB context, the app DB context you see there is technically an interface, but this gives you an extra layer on top of that, which allows you a lot more flexibility in how you implement to the front end. So the other way I found interfaces really useful, hopefully the page down will work, is when I was accessing tables that were talking to Woo, I found that I had very common elements across those tables. So the Woo tables have products, and they have attributes, and they have categories, and they have attribute terms. But if you think about them, basically, except for the actual REST call to Woo, the basics are all the same. So I wrote a single interface which had everything I needed in it. And then for me to write another table with the same functionality as what I've got with all this. So whether I'm doing items or orders or categories or attributes or attribute terms, they all basically can use the same interface. And all I need to do is fill the code in. So it means that I don't have to sit there designing the code over and over again. I've got one UI, one interface, which I can then interface the UI. And if I want to add other stuff in to it needs to interface to Woo, I can just put it into the interface. This has really sped up my development time. So once I've written the basics of the one table, which took me about, I'm not a full-time developer. I only really have about, because I have to go to work in the morning, and then I come back and develop, and I go back to work. So I've only really got about 10 to 12 hours of development time a week, unless I work through the night or work on weekends, which I'm trying to not do because I've got kids. To get this up and running took me about 2 weeks, but then for me to apply it to the other items in Woo took about a day and a half per item. So it was that was seriously increased my speed in development time. Okay, so enough talking about .NET. Let's talk about Blazor. So Blazor is both server and client side. Okay, it was started off as a server side interface. Now it's got client side as well. It uses WebAssembly to embed. My picture's coming up, I promise you. I wish it was as fast for me. It's a bit hard to describe this without the picture, but basically the DOM is rendered in parts. So Signal IR, which does exist in .NET, is the secret source. And it actually renders only the part of the DOM that's changed. There is a demo later of this. I'll explain it to you. Hopefully it'll work. It's a GIF, so it should actually, I put it into a GIF, so it should actually work. But basically your backend, whether your backend sitting within the client or within the server, Blazor doesn't really care. It sees everything. It sees everything. It's controlling everything on the DOM, and it uses basically the Razor components and .NET, and whether or not underneath that is the ASP.NET Core or WebAssembly, it doesn't know. So the power, which is one of the main things that Blazor has, is normally you need JavaScript to do all this DOM manipulation. You don't need that anymore. You don't need to write these inline functions and all that stuff on the top of your code, which I had to do in the .NET 2. So I'm going to go to the next page while this is changing. So what happens is the Signal IR only detects which part of the DOM has changed and only updates that part. So you don't have this browser refresh flashing up, which was happening in .NET thing, and then you had to use Ajax or something like that to try avoid Ajax. You don't need Ajax. You don't need anything like that. You don't need any of these other products that are available. It's all inside of Blazor. And now my demo is going to take ages to thing. So I'll just quickly, it's coming now. So when you say I want a new Blazor project in Visual Studio, it creates a basic layout, which has got it's just based on Bootstrap. It's got a top bar, a left bar, a body bar, and then the DOM, which is, as I said, is using Signal IR. I don't know what you can see. Hopefully you can see that the counter is changing. Can you see that? And you'll see the code, all it does is have a HTML tag that updates the counter. And all you do to display the counter is say @current count. The click is in manipulating the count. So as you click on the button, it increments the count. And there's no JavaScript, there's nothing. That is all that you need.
So yes, the Signal IR, I assume, is this like a how does that work, or is that maybe outside the scope of your?
Yeah, so Signal IR is part of .NET. It basically does some magic to figure out which part of the DOM has changed. If you want to, there's a lot of stuff written about it. It's super complex. It's some genius basically wrote the code. It does sound like there is a thing called Blazor Train, which I watched where the guy goes into in quite depth, but basically it's basically like a much faster version of Ajax. That's the only way I can explain it. But you'll see, but as far as you're concerned as a code, you'll see all you do is you put that data out there and you don't worry about how it's going to be displayed. But you'll see the GIF is it's very quick. I stole this GIF from somebody else's website, so I can't claim it. But if you if you install Visual Studio and you install the Blazor app, you're going to immediately see this working out the box. Okay. It's a bit confusing because first time you install, you think, oh, it's giving me a framework, but it's actually not a framework. It's just a sample app.
Warren, am I correct in saying that this could be running on the server or in the browser doesn't matter because Signal IR basically takes care of all of that.
Correct.
Okay.
So whether this is in a web app, in a WebAssembly on the client, or whether it's on server side being rendering, the Signal IR actually, so Signal IR actually is the connection between the client and the server. So it actually is a very thin connection. So if you're clicking on your thing, even though the web page is being rendered on the server for the server version, it will then actually move only the part of the website that's back and forth, and the clients on each side of the Signal IR will basically update only the page that needs to be updated. Well, in WebAssembly, it does the same thing, but obviously local to the client. So let me just see.
I assume if you wanted to have quite a strong sort of offline component of your app, you'd use the sort of WebAssembly route, and then I imagine that would enable you to do lots of stuff when there is no connection, and then sort of would magically sort of update the state on the server then when you get connection.
So there is actually an example of that. There's a pizza ordering system and that they have on the Microsoft thing, which that you can build the app yourself. You can basically go through a tutorial which covers how to use often online on a client, specifically on a mobile app. And I haven't done that. It is what I want to eventually do. The fact that it can be done is actually what's important to me. I'll figure out how to do it when I have to. I'll cover the community is quite. I'm not a big fan of Stack. What's the name? I keep forgetting the name.
Stack Overflow.
Yes, I find the community there extremely negative, so I've kept away from them. I'll cover it now, but I've been using Gitter. The community there is far more productive, and there's no you've posted in the wrong forum, and please don't post here. You know, if you post a .NET query in a Blazor thing, they don't care. It's basically like Twitter for programmers. I don't know if anybody of you guys use it. Anybody use it?
I've installed it, but I haven't actually used it. I didn't even realize
really
it was
awesome.
Stack Overflow, to be honest.
Yeah, look, I got so sick and tired of people basically lambasting me on Stack Overflow. When I'm stuck. You know, there's a reason why I'm posting. I'm not posting because I'm wasting time. And then somehow, you know, can't you Google this? Okay, well, what do you think I did for like 3 days before I posted here? So I just thought it's not a productive community for me. So I just got out of it. So, well, with Gitter, it's been phenomenal. I've asked like basic questions like, is .NET and .NET 5 and .NET Core the same thing? And people have said, yeah, it's saying yes. You know, well, on Stack Overflow, somebody will basically just refer to the website. So I don't use Stack Overflow. I find them negative. Anyway, can I continue?
Please do.
Okay, so what to me is exciting about Blazor is the components, and I'm going to explain, go into this a bit more depth. But basically, what components do is allow you to very easily put code from write code once and then reuse it. So they had this in ASP.NET where you could have these colons, like your own HTML tags, but it was very messy and it was not easy to maintain. So here with the way this has worked is it's extremely easy to do framework expansion. In fact, I'm using a framework expander called Blazor, which I'll mention. And it's multi-platform, as I said, and with .NET 6, Blazor components will be dynamic. So why that's important is one of the things I stumbled into was I wanted to have recursive components. So I wanted a component to call itself because it was referring to, so I had an item who has a parent item, but I want the parent item also to call the item component, and it was causing obviously an endless loop. So if I can render a dynamic component, that would be a cool way to solve it. But there are some third-party dynamic component renderers, but I didn't play with them. So in the meantime, I've used I'm waiting for .NET 6. But just to show you, I don't know if you'll see my mouse, but you'll see I've put some code snippets there. One is to pass in. So you pass in your variables like an ID or whether or not a Boolean or whatever, or you can pass in a reference. The references are used for you to access the class externally from the component class externally from your parent. So you've got a parent which calls a component, and the parent can talk to the component through the reference, and the component can call the parent through an event, which means that you've got this, you can communicate between these components back and forth and back and forth. And it does make it very powerful when you're trying to do things like, have a single modal dialogue where you want to have, you design it once and then all you want to do is render the questions and the buttons, and that's dynamically. So I'm going to go into some examples here, and I'm a bit worried that my video won't work, but we'll take a look. The first example is basically I wrote a component to where I can store all my WooCommerce settings. So WooCommerce uses REST. It uses a REST API, which obviously has keys and URLs and all that stuff, which I want to use in more than one place of the app. So I wrote the component once, put it into a component file, and now what I want to do is I want to share that component with multiple parts of the app. So I'm going to hope this plays. Just shout if it doesn't. Press play and let's see what happens. It's supposed to go to full screen, so let's see. We wait with bated breath. I thought I'd video all the demos rather than take the risk of having technical issues, and never thought about the fact that I might have technical issues with Zoom. Aha, so can you guys see it? Is it too small?
Well, it's not playing, so it's gone full screen for me, but it's not actually doing anything.
But can everybody see this?
No, I don't think it's actually
Is it
showing.
supposed to be a video? Is it supposed to be doing something, or is it?
It's supposed to, but on my side the video is not running.
Okay.
I can see full screen, but it's not running. Yes.
So let me see if I can pause the video. Try run it again. I can talk through it if the video doesn't run. Unfortunately, without the video, you can't see it working, but I'll give you the basics. I'll press the pause button. Hopefully that'll work. Okay, so can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is the component I'm talking about. So this piece of code here is sitting in a component. So all my settings about whether or not where it's picking the URL up from, where it must go to fetch the API, all that stuff, that's all stored in the component. Okay, so I only need to, so whether I put it under the system preferences or I do it under the import export or I do whatever, that one little component is written once. I don't have to write it many times. I'm going to see if I can skip ahead. demo live. Okay.
Here we go. Go big, go home.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I was trying to show you. So this is the app. So on the company preferences, hopefully it won't crash. This is the components I was talking about. So here's the components. I can open and close it. I can manipulate it. I can change it. I can check my WU parameters. I've then also include it in over here where I'm doing my imports. So here I want to do my imports of my items. I don't want to then go back into system preferences and then basically go, you have to remember to do system preference first. So here's the same components in this thing, and I can then hide it or unhide it or whatever. I got full control of that. Let me just see if I can show you the code. I just want to show you the code to that. So this is the actual component. And what I can do is I can, if I go to the import razor, you'll see all I'm doing to include that component is this one line here.
Well, we can't see the code. I'm just seeing the browser.
Oh, okay. Let me just, oh, wait, because it doesn't like sharing. I forgot that. Let me just do Alt S. Zoom. Who was the Zoom expert? How do I share more than one screen? Okay, here. Okay. Can you see the code now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you'll see. So here is the code to include the component, which is that single line. The component itself is here. We have written all the code, but to include that whole component, all I do is put that one line in my Blazor code, and I've got the whole component sitting there. So that's in the import. If I go to the system preferences, I just want to find them quickly. So here we've got the system preferences. Here we've got all the preferences. And once again, all I do is include that one line of code a bit further down. Find it. I'm trying to find it now. I can't find it all of a sudden. It's a single line of code in a plethora of code.
Can you search for it?
Oh, I'll just get the component name again. Preferences. Okay, so here's the other one. So it's just a one line of code, and I include that preference in it, even though it's in a different part of the code. So to go back to the thing, so here is where I'm doing the import, and here under the preferences is where I've got a totally different part of the code. Do you guys see how clear that is? Is it clear? I'm a bit nervous about running PowerPoint again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I followed all of that, but basically you're just reusing the one component.
So basically, I write the component once, and I don't have to use it over and over again. I don't have to rewrite the code. That's the point.
Yeah.
No. So whether or not, so normally in an app you'd write all the settings in one place, and then you always have to go to that settings to go back. That's the example. But a better example is probably. I'm trying to see if I can share my other screen now. No, this PowerPoint's just really slow. It doesn't like Zoom. Maybe Zoom blocked it. Okay, well, I'll show you the other demo now. Okay, so the other example that I did was basically we have items, categories, attributes. So attributes have varieties. This is going to be a bit slow because it's going off and doing a REST call here. If I click over here, I get a grid.
So you're not sharing, are you?
Is it not? It's not there.
No. Oh, there's nothing sharing.
Okay, just hold on. Do that and that. And share. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so here we have a grid, okay, and the grid is then pulling data from the database. You mentioned earlier about doing stuff where you're doing server pulling or whatever. This is actually a paged data call. So when I click on next and previous, I'm actually paging through the database. It's not an in-memory database. If I click on this, you'll see I've got a list of all the attributes over here. Okay, this grid is actually a component. So I've taken a grid, and inside the grid, I've put another component so I can quickly edit it. Notice how these buttons are outline buttons. That's what's important. And if I click on edit, I get a dialog, and the dialog is just notice what it looks like. I can then, if I go now to the varieties themselves, so we were on coffee brew type. I go here and I choose coffee brew type. You see the buttons have changed because in the component I put a Boolean to decide whether or not it's a parent grid or a child grid. But if I click over here, I get exactly the same modal. So so I've now got a piece of code that sits inside this grid, can sit inside another grid. So that's really powerful. You get what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah,
I'll try to show you that code. So this is the component that shows the grid. Here is the major grid, and then it has a detailed grid which. So this is the main one where I just display the card. So I'm going too fast to shout, please, because I'm jumping back and forth a bit. So this is this screen. So this screen, I go and choose this, and I get the grid depending on what I choose. That code is here, and all I'm doing to bring that grid in, I'm saying if I've chosen a parent ID, then display the component. So I put some title there and all that stuff, so I could even put that in the component if I want to. But if I go to and the attributes, which are the parents, here's the attribute grid, which is rather long. If I'm going too fast, please shout, okay? So that's the attribute grid. But in the attribute grid, I have a detail which then will display only that subgrid. I'll get there eventually, sorry. Okay, and here it is here. So I'm saying if it's a detail on the detail row, get the item and pass that same ID back in, and then it'll go to the manipulation. So it's just a single line of code to include both in both areas. So let's go back here. So this piece of code and this piece of code is identical. All I'm doing is passing in a Boolean that decides whether or not the buttons must be outline or things, so that if you're in the two grids, you can see that the user can see there's definitely a difference in this one and that one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think what is so exciting about this for me is that, like, I've seen this on, like, that this kind of thing is, it's available on the server side in many web frameworks, and it's available in, like, with a complex JavaScript framework like Angular, React. But to see sort of one code base that you can just write your components once, and then sort of it's taken care of on the client, or whether it's running on client or server. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. And this is what got me excited about it. Let me see if I can. I'm actually more or less finished. I was going to go through some questions and stuff, but I just talk about some stuff. Let me see if I can share the screen quickly. Okay. Okay. I'm not going to start PowerPoint because I don't want to start that up again. So basically, this is my second last slide. I just wanted to talk about what I have used in the project. So I've used nlog. I don't know if you guys, it's basically a .NET log program. It's very powerful. I log a lot of stuff to the log, and the log is really useful. You can put anything in that log. You've got a lot more flexibility. I can go through that, but we've got running out of time. I'm using a framework called Blazor, which is open source. The guy who wrote it, the Gitter, is very active. The guy who wrote this now has got other people. So it's an open source framework, and he's now decided to release it commercially and any company that does more than $1 million in turnover has to pay a license, but otherwise it's free. I also use Blazor Toast. I suppose I can show you if you're interested in that, but basically it's just the little toast messages that pop up. I use that quite a lot to give feedback to the user. The rest is done through a NuGet package called WooCommerce Net, which allows you to very quickly write REST calls to Woo. It supports the version 1, version 2, and version 3 of the Woo API. Then there's a whole lot of supporting packages that you can look at, but I can share this if you're interested. If you're interested in Blazor, I would strongly recommend you do the guy from Brzezium Tech. His courses are really good. He does a MVC and a Blazor tutorial, which covers a lot more than I've touched here, including the whole REST thing. There's quite a lot of YouTube communities that I'm on, which I enjoy. And then, as I think I've mentioned, GitHub. And then that's it. So in summary, the idea is to use my old knowledge in C and C# to basically improve my ability to write an app that is going to be more modern, and hopefully I wanted to release the app as open source so it can be available to more than. Order management systems are quite expensive. I did look on a couple on the internet. A lot of them are really not very good. They do interface into Shopify, into Woo, but they start at about $100 a month, which I think is ridiculous. I think anybody charging that kind of money for something that really is, well, it's taken me a lot longer to write this than I thought, but I think it's a bit of a rip-off what they charge. Anyway, that's it. Any Q&A?